He's been named British International Journalist of the Year 7 times. He's one of the most respected Western journalists on the planet who covers the Middle East, not from the press release fed safety of media centres in Washington or London, but from the streets where the stories originate. He's documented massacres and the real consequences of war and has challenged the myopic view of Western media so much so that he's often been criticised as painting the West out as an aggressor. His supporters counter this by saying he tells it like it is. For the next 30 minutes on Let's Be Frank, author and journalist Robert Fisk. Robert, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
When I knew I was going to interview you and talk about the Middle East, I was trying to think of where to start. And I thought the only place
I was trying to think of where to start when I realised you were going to talk to me. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I thought the only place that you really can start is Israel. And it seems to be the place that most people don't want to talk about when they interview you. And I was wondering, when I was doing the research that I did on Israel, and it seemed to me, well, there are some people that say that the only time it really looked like there was possible of peace was when Palestine and Israel had a symbiotic relationship, and there was a whole bunch of Palestinians that went in to do menial labour and things like that. And then 800,000 Russian Jews moved into Israel and took up a lot of that labour. And now you have in Israel that a lot of its economy is dependent on homeland security products.
Certainly homeland security products. Look, I think the problems that Israel has and the problems that the Arabs have with Israel is not about the economy. It centres on the fact that despite all the various agreements and all the appeals of the United States and all the appeals of Europe, Israel continues to build colonies for Israelis, and Israelis only, on Arab land. It says it wants peace. I would like that to be the case. It says it wants security. It deserves security. But as long as you want peace and go on taking other people's land, you will not have peace. Back at the time of Oslo, when Arafat, and remember the famous handshake was presided over by Clinton, at that time, the Palestinians and the world was told that this Oslo peace agreement was going to be founded on UN Security Council Resolution 242, which is the resolution, and we're supposed to abide by UN resolutions, of course. It was the resolution which called for Israeli forces to pull out of territories occupied during the '67 war in return for the security of all states in the area, including Israel. It also insisted upon the non-admissibility of the acquisition of land through war. And Oslo was supposed to be, and it states in the Oslo Agreement, which everyone was supposed to believe was going to be the end of all warfare and conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, that it would be, the foundation would be UN Resolution 242. I remember many families in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians, who had longed for the idea of returning to territories which the Israelis took in '48, or which became the State of Israel in '48, which started, of course, the whole refugee exodus of 750,000 Palestinians, who had longed for the idea of going back to villages they had lived in that territory. And I know many Palestinian families and individual Palestinians who accepted at that time that Israel was going to exist and that they would have a truncated state called Palestine in 22% of Mandate Palestine. And those people, I remember seeing them coming out with flowers and putting them in the rifle barrels of Israeli soldiers, and the Israelis smiling at them and speaking to them very politely, and it looked... I didn't believe that Oslo was going to work because all the major issues, like the future of settlements and the future of Jerusalem and the so-called right of return, which is a General Assembly resolution that applies to Palestinian refugees from '48, it was all to be put off to the end of the agreement. So when everyone had made, friends and loved each other and trusted each other, then we'll deal with Jerusalem. Yeah. And I didn't believe this was going to work. There were no international guarantees. 242 was not actually written out. It was only founded, it was supposed to be founded upon 242. And as the negotiations wore on, and it became clear that East Jerusalem was not going to be allowed to be a Palestinian capital, the Israelis wanted that capital to be in a little village called Abu Dis. As the settlements continued to be built during the Oslo process, as more and more it became clear that there was going to be no right of return. I didn't think there was, actually, but I said from the very start, this will not work. Of course, I was accused of being a pessimist, anti-peace, pro-terrorist, all the usual rubbish. But I remember watching Oslo slowly fragmenting, watching it turn to dust. And after it turned to dust, the violence returned. Suicide bombers, you know the story that followed. And now, when I talk to those same Palestinians who were prepared to accept the partition of Mandate Palestine, prepared to accept that Israel would exist side by side with the Palestinian state, now they talk to me, many, and not all of them, but many of them talk to me now, we'd like to go back to Haifa, we'd like to go back to Netanya, we want to go to Tel Aviv. They want the original Palestine mandate in its entirety as an Arab nation, or as an Arab Jewish nation, but certainly as an Arab nation. And that means that all those hopes have been dashed. Now, better not to have those hopes than to create hopes that you then destroy.
Does Israel want peace?
I know many Israelis who want peace. And I know many Israelis who believe that Israel should get out and close down the settlements and get out of the West Bank. But those Israelis do not represent the whole of Israel. You know, I can go in Israel and see leftist politicians. It's a habit of Westerners. When you arrive in Israel, you go to see those Israelis who will say what you want to think Israel believes, right? And I can go and see people in various political parties, and they entirely agree with my point of view, and I agree with their point of view, and you go away thinking, well, Israel's not so bad, that's okay, it's going to be all right. Then you get on the bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Don't go in the car or a taxi, get on the bus. And you talk to the Israelis on the bus, and they say, well, what's wrong with the settlements? What's wrong? Who wants these Arabs coming, goodbye Palestine? The Israeli governments, successive governments, whether they be, the new party, Kadima, whether they be Likud, whether they be Labour, they'll all say they want peace and they all continue to build more settlements. Now, if a country goes on building more settlements and then calls the people who object to it terrorists, there ain't going to be no peace. If I come to your house and I take over the house and leave you in the garden and say, well, you can have the bathroom and the back hall, but you can't have the front hall, I'm keeping the lounge and the main bedroom. After a while, you'll get very angry with me. You'll try to go to the law, the United Nations, and at some point, you might even angrily throw a stone through the window because you'd like me out of your home. At which point I say to you, you're a terrorist. You're using violence, aren't you?
But if you said it's not about the economy, but if you make your living while being in my house by selling strengthened windows, doesn't it help that
I think that's a little abstruse. Look, the whole point of this is that it's about land.
Yeah.
It's about the acquisition of land and the illegal acquisition of land, which continues with the famous wall, which journalists want to call a fence or a security barrier. The East Germans called the Berlin Wall a security barrier. In that sense, it's a good idea. It's very like the Berlin Wall, except it's longer and taller. But as long as you take someone else's land, which does not belong to you, illegally, against all international law, you will not have peace.
A cartoonist for the New Zealand Herald, Malcolm Evans, was sacked for suggesting that the Israeli wall that cuts through 11% of Palestinian land was similar to apartheid. Do you think that the Israeli...
Well, look what happened to Carter. He talked about apartheid, separation, etc. Look, the problem is not whether we're talking about apartheid or not. Remember what apartheid meant, I think, was separate development. That was actually what it meant, translated from Dutch in South Africa at the time. There's certainly a lot of separate development going on. But the problem is, you see, it's like the way when Blair wanted to go to war in Iraq, he used World War II. When you want to attack the wall, you use apartheid. You constantly go back and find historical parallels and bring them forward and find a horrible word, and then you make everyone think, or you believe that everyone's going to agree with you because you've used this word, and everyone's, oh yes, it's an apartheid wall. I don't think it elucidates or clarifies the realities of the Middle East, nor how bad it is, by using these words at all. I remember when all the Palestinians used to refer to the Zionist death wagon. This was supposed to be Israel, before jumping into a ditch because they saw an aeroplane coming. And the Israelis referred to, they referred to the pathetic, corrupt old Arafat as our bin Laden. Give me a break. Arafat might like to be bin Laden, but he ain't no bin Laden. And you end up by calling it the wall. Look, you have to draw the parallel with a Berlin Wall. Is it to keep people out, or is it to keep people in? What is that wall really for? Okay, ostensibly to stop suicide bombers getting into Israel. And in doing that, it's been quite successful. And you have to remember, it has been quite successful. The number of suicide bombers inside Israel has significantly decreased since the building of that wall. But the problem with the wall is that it is forward of the state of Israel, as it would once have been. It's forward of the Israelis call it a seam line. They don't want to call it a frontier because it may change. And in putting it forward, the line you get from the Israeli spokesman is, well, I've had Israelis say this to me, Robert, we're not saying it's permanently there. In a state of peace, it doesn't have to be there. But it can move, right? But it can also continue to move forward. It doesn't have to go back towards Israel again.